Welcome back, everyone, to the Disaster Tough podcast, where we share insights into the big plays and right calls of leadership. We dive deep into the stories, lessons learned, and ideas that will help you in the field. Let's go. Welcome back to the Disaster Tough podcast. I'm your host, John Scardina. I am so excited for this episode. I've known Rob now for a few years. I think the first time I met him in person was in a conference in Savannah, maybe in 2021 or 22, which was really great. But I actually knew him through one of his staff members, another Rob. So shout out to Rob, who went to a dynamic populations class. They are a really great team. Him and Rob, I call them the Rob squared. They've had all kinds of incidents that they've had to deal with up in Michigan. Rob Dale is also a meteorologist, and so he's going to be able to talk about weather events and his kind of background. He does public speaking all the time, so you'll be able to hear some really great insights from him. But unfortunately, through the other Rob, he contacted me during the active shooter up there in Michigan, and so that unfortunate situation, they have the whole gambit that they have to deal with. They're also with the sheriff's department, so that's another angle that they work through. And so now they're working with counties, private sector, the weather side, the man-made side. They get to cover it all. And so it is really a great honor for me to have Rob on here. If you're on LinkedIn at all, you've had to have seen Rob post at least 20 times in the last 10 days. Really exciting stuff. Every time he posts, it gets a ton of traction because he has really great insights. So with that, I would like to bring Rob on the show. Rob, how you doing?
Great, thanks. And remember, it was your podcast that I emailed you because of something I questioned on your podcast, and you called me back. I'm like, that never happens. Like normally I do it. It's like, just in the wind. But we had a good chat about that. So
absolutely. You know what? I thoroughly appreciate when people challenge it because, one, I have my perspective. I understand I have a perspective. And I think you and I are very much alike, where if we say something, we probably think we're right. At the same time, I actually have no problem saying, hey, this is kind of the angle that I'm coming at. And I love learning. It's part of the reason why we have this show. But yeah, I feel like we've known each other now for a few years because of these interactions. And I've only seen you once in person, which is just bizarre to me. But I do feel like I know you. So it's kind of nice to have you on the show.
That's the way it works these days. So good to be here.
So I mentioned that, in the introduction here, that you do public speaking a lot. And I have seen you. We don't really have a circuit in EM, but there's definitely like this feeling. When you go out to present, what are the topics that you are most passionate, like that you want to talk about? What do you hit on?
My biggest top passion is to combine my meteorology background with emergency management. Now, as part of the way this system works with grants, you have to use the T word in everything. Everything has to have a nexus to terrorism. And I get it. I'm not saying it's not important. Sometimes it may not be the most important thing that we have to deal with. So I want to keep, I'm looking at the past few incidents here. We've been dealing with a FEMA disaster for a tornado. So, and then as you mentioned, we did have a mass shooting at Michigan State University, terrorism-ish related. So protection there. So I'm not downplaying it. I'm just saying, looking forward, terrorism is not always number one on my list, and I want people to also to pay attention to those other things that are a little more likely.
I was in a meeting, and I won't say which state I was in, but they're going after the DHS grant, the UOC grant, and it's a counterterrorism thing. So they had to, and they were trying to come up with all the clever ways in the world to get to figure out how they could prove that sandbags and like flood control was related to terrorism. And I was like, guys, there's other grants out there for that. But the reality is we have to deal with that. The dynamic populations class, we use a terrorist attack because I want to say it's sexy, but it keeps people on their toes. But really, it is a leadership course, but we have to promote it as a counterterrorism class because we understand that grant problem. So from your angle, I mean, you're also in the sheriff's department, so there is always that man-made element for sure. But weather is a beast. And if you're in FEMA, I think FEMA sometimes thinks they're like a hurricane response agency. And there's good reason for it, but you're talking about tornadoes. there was 9 tornadoes in Omaha, where I just interviewed somebody, Jake, out there, Jake, and he talked about having 9 tornadoes. And Oklahoma just got blasted by something like 49 tornadoes. So when you're talking about weather events, weather seems to be changing, and the frequency and the damage of tornadoes and or other weather-related events seems to be going up. And I can't get beyond, like, everyone's just moving to the danger spot. Like, that can't be the only reason. Do you agree with that? Do you think it's like mostly like a man-made, people are moving to like places that they shouldn't live? Or do you think that the weather is also changing?
I think some of that always plays a factor. We certainly have more people, so by the very nature, we're going to have that. But what I've been on the EM circuit, as we talk about lately, is really talking about FEMA's National Disaster Preparedness Training Center. NDPTC has a climate change adaptation course, and what we do in that course is really we walk through what's changing in your weather, and we don't, we go through the science. We talk a little bit about the why, but we don't get into how to fix climate. Whether it's not, I do not mention EV usage or, cap and trade or whatever, greenhouse gas capture. I don't get into that because as emergency managers, I'm not saying it's not important, but we need to deal with the impacts. So at the end of the day, I don't care why my weather's changing. I just know something is changing. So we're seeing an expansion of the tornado alley. It's not that it's shifting away from Oklahoma, Texas.
Yeah.
Certainly this year's proved it. It's there. But we're seeing other parts of the country. Ohio was the tornado king up until these recent outbreaks. So it's just trying to get people aware of, because they hear the climate and they instantly go political. And I'll be honest, there was a time when that was where I was as well. Even as a scientist, I rejected the science because of my political background. And then through a lot of circumstances, realized I got to keep that separate. How we fix climate change is an issue. As emergency managers, we need to deal with what's going on, and what does the future look like.
The L3 Harris Extreme 400p radio solves problems and is specifically designed for emergency services. How do we know? We field tested it with medical, urban search and rescue, and collapse and confined structures. This radio is amazingly tough. Check out the L3 Harris Extreme 400p radio at l3harris.com right now. How do you spell Doberman Emergency Management? EOP, OEP, HVA, HMP, Thyra, TTX, Drone, PDA. Whenever you need an expert, Doberman Emergency Management field experts are there for support. Contact an expert at DobermanEMG.com today.
The argument for me always gets kind of funny, to be honest, because to be honest, I kind of hate both sides of all politics. I think they all suck, to be honest. And I can say that now because I'm in the private sector, but which is great. However, the argument for or against, I always think is kind of silly because, like, ultimately, we have a responsibility to take care of things. I don't want to breathe in crap. And if I go to a beach, I don't want my kids to be stepping on broken glass or trash or otherwise. And so it's like, I think, weather aside, because I do want to get to the weather, when we're talking about taking care of our environment, I think that's just a smart thing to do. Like, I want to enjoy the place I live in. If it impacts, if that is a causality of weather, even better. If it's not, I still want to take care of the place I live in. So just leaving it within that, vague box, weather is a problem and weather is beautiful. And it's difficult for me because, like, I've always wanted to see what an EF5 tornado looks like. Like, I want to stare at that beast. I'm like, oh my gosh, but I don't want it to impact people. As a meteorologist who obviously understands EM and walking through that world, how do you deal with the excitement of weather, but making sure that it puts it in its rightful place? Do you have that conflict as well?
Oh yeah. So actually my weather interest as a child, I was scared to death of storms. Like, would make myself nauseous if a thunderstorm was approaching. And I had a third grade teacher, Mrs. Horner, who had us make a little barometer in a bottle with 2 straws coming out. And the very first day we made it, the barometer went down. I had this handy dandy chart that said storms were coming, and it stormed that night. And I was like, hey, I know I'm in control now because I knew the storm was coming. Now, it wasn't that quite as easy, but but that's what started me on this path. And then now I live in an area where we get just enough storms to keep it going, but not, not Oklahoma like that. I want the happy mix of keeping my, we've got severe weather here in the summer, we've got severe weather in the winter. As a meteorologist, I like forecasting those because I've been given the talent through whatever reasons. I've got the ability and the knowledge to help predict those. So I like to put that to use. I don't want to, again, nothing against California forecasting, but that would be too boring for me. And on the other hand, Oklahoma, every time a thunderstorm pops up, you just say tornado. So it's a good mix here. So I have that excitement, and I keep that internal. There's another meteorologist I chat with every time it storms with the Weather Service. We'll chat internally and talk stuff like that. But when it comes to public, it's strictly, here's the threat, here's the concern. I'm not and I understand in this Twitterverse that we have today that you have to be really, really excited and jump up and down. And I may like it because it's just to see the enormity of what's going on, but I'm not going to say that or do anything like that ever for the public to see. So
it makes me think of the line, and I'm going to butcher this line, so nobody can roast me on this, but from Anchorman, where he says it's 80 degrees on the west, it's 50 degrees on the east, and in the Middle East, it's all degrees. Yeah, it's the Midwest definitely keeps it real.
Yeah.
From the sheriff's department perspective, why need a meteorologist, and how does a meteorologist impact law enforcement operations?
Great question. First, I'll start with so our emergency management by the county is based in the sheriff's office. That's just the way it had always been. It had started that way in the 90s and just kind of has gone through there. So Bob Borkel, who you've dealt with, he's came up through the sheriff's office and now is the emergency manager for the county. I am the non-sheriff. I was a civilian that came in and was special deputized for this role. But that's the first question, because I was on TV for 10 years, so I still run into people say, why does the sheriff's office have a weatherman? Like, well, I do other things too. I do other things. But from a weather perspective, just even we had a tornado last August that did some significant damage and killed 2 people, unfortunately. But I'm on the air giving our deputies a minute by minute update of where the storm is. So, they could, nothing against the Weather Service. The Weather Service have to update every 20 or 30 minutes. That doesn't do a whole lot. I'm actually right there saying, here's where the tornado is. It was moving down our expressway, I-96. I was giving them exit numbers so I could see it on radar. So doing my best to keep them safe. The interesting thing, after this tornado hit, we were not getting any calls at all. And radar confirmed that we've got a tornado. We're seeing the debris in the clouds. If you've heard that before, that the radar can pick up the stuff. So we're seeing debris. We know it's moving through a populated area, and we're not getting any calls. And I was getting worried the longer that lasted, because no calls at all when there's a tornado is a bad sign. And that ended up being the case. The first call was an overturned car. Someone said there was a car crash on the highway. Well, that was the tornado had gone through and flipped over 30 to 40 vehicles. It took a long time for calls to get out. It affected the cell system. So that aspect of, again, interpreting, instead of just saying tornado warning for Ingham County, I'm actually to say, here's where the storm is. So stay south of it, get out of that area, but be ready to go in. And as soon as it lifted, we sent everyone north towards that area. So it comes in handy.
You brought up something, this sticking point for me, and I know that you're an authority on this, so I'm hyper curious to ask you on it. It feels for me, so on my professional side of the house, on the Doberman side of the house, we've been working a lot with not just the end user, but the technologies as well, people who put out mass notifications, and tried to drastically improve that. And like the best I've been able to come up with, and Zach Borst is really like our lead on that, and he does some incredible work as well. But it does feel like mass notifications is like the wild, wild west. Like wherever you go, that's what you get. And, there was a funny video that I kind of mocked it. It was at last summer where the notification went out at like 4:00 in the morning, and it woke everybody up and they got mad in Florida. But that just proved that it worked. So it was actually you're welcome. But then you fast forward to Baltimore, and they didn't have enough time to send it out. And unfortunately, during the bridge collapse. And so it's like, from somebody who knows it so well. All the people who are listening to this, I bet every single person on this call has some kind of degree of just like little gut wrench when we talk about mass notifications. How can you help us get better at mass notifications around the country? Are there tips, tricks, ideas, insights that you could share?
Yep. So that's a big passion for me, and it's interesting. Years ago, before I made the jump to emergency management, someone said, "Why are you on TV?" And I said, "Because that's the best way to get." Back in the year 2000, we didn't have apps. We didn't. We had our weather radio, which is great, but that's still localized, and there was no better way than TV to get your word out. Well, now we have better ways, including wireless emergency alerts, mass notification, the platforms that we use. The issue is that we have a lot of people coming up through the ranks that don't ever communicate directly with the public. I see so much cop talk, no offense to cops, cop talk and messages that, the suspect fled on foot. How about the guy ran away? Just the weirdest police activity reference the police activity. I'm like, what? Like, you have to write that in a report. I get it. But this is the public we're talking to. So block numbers, no one knows what block, I know what block number I live in, but if I'm not in that area, give me a big intersection. Give me something that even if I live there, I don't know block numbers in my city.
I have no idea what block number I live. Yeah.
So it's just trying to get people past I think they feel they need to have to do something, and they necessarily haven't been trained for it. FEMA was kind of behind the ball on training. We had to take a simple IS class, the independent study, and you know how that works. You press click as fast as you can, and then take the questions. So they're getting better at offering good training. The problem is it's still not required. So we can have it out there, but if people don't take it, and the problem is, and what gets me worked up, is because you can go in and you can turn off a wireless emergency alert, and there are certain states, if I'm going to go to them, I'm probably going to turn them off because they misuse the system. Those should be for something that's either going to kill you or it could tremendously impact your day. It's got to be something really, really big. And I've seen it for, there's a power outage on a street. I've seen it for, it's going to snow a little bit tomorrow. I've seen it for, your polling location is such and such. Like, no, someone's going to die. If you're sending the WIA out, it's got to be something huge.
Yes.
Because this is the only way that we have to get into people's phones. And once they turn it off, guess what? They don't think to themselves, you know what, I turned it off. I need to turn it back on now because a tornado or an active shooter might be coming, and we need to get ahead of that.
We have a parade tomorrow. Parking might be difficult. It is not the time to send out an emergency alert. We had tornado sightings. We had 3 tornadoes in one day about a month ago. And luckily for me, and understanding a little bit of GIS, I was watching where the storms wasn't even over in my head, not even close. And I walked outside. I was like, I just want to see like if I could see anything, right? Because that curiosity bug. And I'm standing there, and there is a chiropractor next to me, and there's 6 wonderful women who work there, doctors and nurses, and 3 of them came outside, and one of them was visibly shaking, so nervous every time the siren goes off. And they're like, hey, could you talk to her real fast? And I was like, yeah, sure. I was just talking to her, just trying to calm her down. Like, hey, it's not overhead. I showed her on the map. This is where it's at. Even if it is, this is what you do. But what was fascinating to me was the woman next to her said, you don't even have to worry about it. And I said, why doesn't she have to worry about the siren? She goes, oh, it's because if they do 2 sirens here, that means there's a tornado on the ground. Because they get so many sirens, they assume that it's the one's the warning and the second one's the actual. And if that doesn't tell you anything about what the public doesn't know and how we have to change our messaging, the other thing that you called out, I'm a big words guy, and I love the fact that you're calling that out of how to communicate with people. I teach communications at SLU. And one of the fascinating things that I thought about for a long time is one of my favorite mentors and or former boss, Jeff, in DC, he would be adamant about using like naval terminology for where people should gather during evacuations, mustering locations. The amount of PhDs that we worked with who didn't know what mustering meant was astronomical. So what's the point? was like, well, maybe we just need to teach them what these words mean. Maybe we need to start communicating with people in a way that they will understand. Yeah, that's fascinating to me that's what you've been called, like that's what you've noticed.
And it's a big issue because in a lot of this, Dr. Dennis Lemley, who passed away, Dr. Jeanette Sutton, they really worked hard on understanding how the public does this. And, they looked hard into what does the public respond to. And you're always going to hear the tornado. You're going to look out and see. If I get an alert right now that says there's been a traffic crash, there's a plume of smoke coming, before I run to the basement, I'm going to go look out and see. We can't stop that, but what we can reduce is the time that they mount it to. Because if I get an alert that says hazardous material cloud coming or whatever, toxic smoke, I look outside, I see the smoke, I'm going to do something. If I see something that says there's a chemical contaminant contained in the air that may be moving in your direction, you need to run, hide, fight, shelter in place, whatever. Like, shelter in place is not a term that the public understands. Does that mean stand right where I'm at because you said shelter in place? It doesn't translate well to other languages, especially. We got to remember that we're a nation of more than just native English speakers. So make things simple. Say there's someone with a gun. Get into your house. Get into a safe place. Run, hide, fight. Whatever. Keep the terminology nice. Don't come up with fancy alerts. I've seen California has alert order, alert warning, and alert evac. I'm like, I don't just tell me what I need to do. Don't give me these codes or phrases, and just make it as easy as you can be. And then link to a web page where you have all the details or whatever you need. But I want that message to tell me what to do as an outsider who doesn't know your lingo, doesn't know it's a 2-siren system that just says there's something going on. Here's what you need to do. Save your life.
Yeah. By the way, this is funny that you bring up California because about a year ago, you got on California a little bit for the mass notifications thing. So I would actually challenge you, instead of doing that, maybe you should move there with the 70-degree weather year round and teach them how to do it. Because I lived in California for 5 years, and it was an educational experience of learning how different localities do it. But
because when they say warning, they don't, with the weather service, a tornado warning means it's here. A blizzard warning means it's a blizzard, and California, an evacuation warning means get ready for an order that you might need to be. So I don't know. Again, communities didn't coordinate when they came up with these code words. Just if you want to use the words, stay with, warning's not the best word in the world. We've been using it for 50 years in the weather service. We're not going to change it. So let's stick with words that we can at least define together.
Well, that's like the words matter thing. And like, if it's the same wherever you go, wherever I'm at, I want to be able to deal with the warnings, right? And speaking of sharing intel and working with different groups, based off of where you're at, I had to do a huge shout out to Task Force 46, the National Guard unit, based up there. I've done so much work with them, and Colonel McKinney is now General McKinney, as I've noted a few times on the show, and he's actually in UCOM now. But there's been, that unit is just all stars all the way around. And because they're up there and you're up there, I understand the MSU has a new EM director, at least that's what I've heard. So it sounds like between that and the raceway, you guys have so much going on right in your neck of the woods, right? From all that coordination that has to happen from all those different groups, moving from like the mass notification side to almost just like daily communications, what wins do you find where people obviously have massively conflicting different priorities and needs, and yet still finding those wins together? How do you guys operate? Do you meet quarterly? How do you do it?
So we meet monthly. We have 10 of us that from basically right in the middle of the state, going down 127, which separates it. So Michigan International Speedway, as you mentioned, MSU, U of M's not part of it, but they're right next to us, so we included with them. But we meet all the EMs, all 10 of us meet every month, then with our groups. It's a requirement, not a requirement, but we just do it. We naturally do it. The way we dole out from grant funds is the same way. We kind of split it. Half of it is on regional projects. The other half the locals get to do. So we combine together for things like mass notification. We've got a drone detection system we just started last year. So we do that as a region, and then we let the locals kind of do some of them as their own. They still bring it to the region just to make sure everything fits in. We don't want someone going off on their own, but it's a standard that we at least touch base every week. And then here in my county, we have separate programs. The city of Lansing has their own EM program, Dehli Township, and then MSU. We are on a regular texting or phone calling basis between us. Sometimes the media stories come out and say everyone's separate. Like, well, we're separate because that's the way the law works. But if it's gone by 2 days and we haven't texted one of us, then something's going wrong. So we make sure relationships are at the top of our more important than equipment.
Well, I saw a small insight into that during the MSU shooting, because I got the text and it's like, hey, where are you at? So I called him and said, he's like, I'm on the way to help. And I know that you guys are coordinating, and yet, like, how does that? Is there anything official? Like, what can somebody else do that around the country? Do you guys like have MOUs in place, or is this like you guys are just so in good coordination that that you can text or call somebody and they'll show up? How does those credentials work?
So we'd actually talked about the MOU process, but that involves legal teams. And you know how corporate or county legal teams get in. And again, not that it's wrong, but it's been a call up for MSU. The same story. As soon as I knew it, I was on the way. Called them as I was on the way, and we just show up. So it's within reason. I don't show up to the neighboring county, but they know. We had another tornado just a month before ours that was in a neighboring county. The EM was up at his cottage. He called me. He says, "Hey, Rob, you're 5 minutes away. Will you go do it?" And I went and did it and ran. I don't have the same interactions, but I do know a lot of them. Again, it was weird being on TV, but people still remember me from my TV weather day. So that adds a little bit. And then it's sometimes weird being a part of a sheriff's office. And I know there's connections between police, but I pull up in a police car with a police jersey on, and it says sheriff on my vest. So people at least recognize that there's something there. It's not saying it's the best way to have it that way, but that's just the way it works out, that there's some validity from being part of the sheriff's office.
Okay, that makes me ask you a very important question, because I'll give you my opinion first, so you don't feel like you're playing guess what's in my head. I have gone completely the opposite direction of what I was years before, where I was like, unmarked cars, we don't need to be considered responders. Now I'm like, lights and sirens, wear something more than a construction vest, whatever, because the validity part, I have found, especially as our company's worked a lot more with militaries lately, that the more official you appear, it's easier to have conversations with people. When they just think you're just like some dude who just thinks that they're important, and when it comes to making smart decisions, you're not included. And I want to give every opportunity in terms of like a branding perspective to help emergency management have a place at the table without overcoming those problems. But that's just my perspective. Because you have done that, do you feel like that has helped you? Do you feel like it's not necessary? Like, where do you fall on that?
I think marked cars of some sorts. Again, it doesn't have to be police or fire, but something that says you're something different.
You're official.
You're official in some form. You're not just, even if it's an unmarked car, people don't recognize that. If it just says EM somewhere, I'm not sure that, I have to fancy it up, because the general public doesn't know what EM is at all. And many first responders really don't know. The chiefs
or care.
The chiefs do. The chiefs kind of know, and the chiefs kind of care, but you don't always deal with the chief. This tornado that I had in Perry, the chief wasn't there. So it was just the fact that the kind of people saw the badges. I had to be somewhat official. So I think there's a requirement. We used to actually host the drone team for the county here. So that's part of the reason every major fire, I don't even wait for them to call. That we have the fire chiefs were not offended that we'll show up with the drone. If I hear a lake rescue, I'm near our Lake Lansing. If it's called, it's not even my jurisdiction. We just show up with the drone. So awesome. We're not first responders, and I'm not trying to replace it, but we will respond to the scene. If it's not going to need us in the EOC, which 99.9% of our incidents don't, thankfully, then why don't I be there? Why don't I put my skills, whether it's flying the drone, whether it's just getting some construction equipment that the fire chief wants, and our 911 center is great and they'll do a great job. But if I'm standing right there and I've got the same context, I'll just save a loop in the process and be right there. So
the best person I have ever seen who's not an emergency management, who acted like a phenomenal emergency manager, was the dispatcher during the MSU shooting. I listened to the entire thing in complete awe. That woman freaking rocked it. She was on top of it. I don't know her name, but if I knew her name, I would send her a shirt and a thank you letter for I would hire her if I honestly could. I thought she was just absolutely on top of it from afar, helping out in the best kind of ways. And if she doesn't have a national award, somebody screwed up, because I think she did her job very well.
And I know every AAR has to have communications, but the 911 side was not in our AAR as an issue. We had other issues. Encryption with.
I actually heard this over the phone, and I was like, "Uh-oh!" But she was
great.
Awesome. Yeah,
she did great. Yeah.
Okay, so we're gonna have to give you back on the show, because I did drones for FEMA, so we're gonna have to talk about drones sometime. But I'm gonna because we have a good relationship, I'm gonna push back on one thing you said at the very end here. So then I'll cut it off so you can't correct me. But I do believe emergency managers have a role as first responders. They're not tacticians. They're at a strategic level. But I really do believe it's emergency management, not project management, emergency management. We should be involved in the emergencies. And quite frankly, I got over it when I would beat USAR to scenes on hurricanes. So if they're first responders and I beat them there, then we're good. But
I call us 1.5, but you commit. I'm down to like 1.2 responder now. So I'm moving up a little bit.
Responders. I'll take the 1.5 maybe, but.
Yeah.
Rob, honestly, it is such a pleasure to talk to you. I love what you post about EM. I love the fact that you're getting out there and helping everybody out with the mess.
And I like to change my opinion too. So if if I post something and someone says that's ridiculous, you convince me, I'll change my. I think that's the great between both of us. I think that's a sign of a mature learner to say, you know what I said was wrong, or I didn't think of this, and I'll fix it. Because it seems in our society, once you say something, even when you find out you're wrong, you're supposed to double down. And I, you and I both are happy to say, you know what, I was wrong. I misunderstood that, or I didn't think of this. Thanks. We don't hear thanks too often on social media when someone gets corrected. So
you know what, honestly, that's a really good call out here at the end. Like saying thank you for teaching me and helping out. And we do all need to be a little more kind. I think there's psychology behind it, and I think the world could use that too. So. I will say thank you for coming onto the podcast, Rob, and I hope to have you on, honestly, soon to talk about the drones. It'd be great to have you. So thanks again.
All right, anytime, sir.
Okay, everybody. If you got something out of this podcast, which you should have, because Rob is awesome. We covered multiple different topics, from weather to coordination to mass notifications. Oh my gosh, we started getting into drones, and then I started getting too excited, so we got to cut this off before we continue on. But if you liked it, please like and subscribe. If you have a comment, if you have a challenge to something we said, I put out lots of controversial stuff all the time on here. Please tell us on social media. Give us your perspective. If you like something, and especially if it's going to help you out, or you're doing something that you find success where you're at, we would love to know what it is. So make sure you follow Disaster Tough Podcast, the Ready to Slap, and the whole deal. And we'll see you for the next one. Peace.